Good morning, everyone. Well, I'm here with a new chapter of your supplementary reader. That is the second book which you are going to read in this session. This is the first chapter of the supplementary reader, A Triumph of Surgery, which is written by James Herriot, actually Dr. James Herriot, who was a veterinary surgeon also. Right now, well, I'm Ashutosh, your English teacher, and I'm going to describe you the chapter, the text in more detail. At first, let us begin with the author, James Alfred Witt, or James Herriot. James Herriot was the pen name of James Alfred Witt. He was born on 3rd October 1960, passed away on 23rd February 1994. He was also known by the pen name James Herriot, as I have already described what a pen name stands for. Pen name stands for that thing. Suppose that if a writer is writing not by his original name, he is using some other name or nickname, that is the pen name also. So by the pen name James Herriot, he was a British veterinary surgeon, a doctor of animals, as well as a writer also. He has used his many years of experience as a veterinary surgeon to write a series of books. He has described in each of the stories about animals and their owners. He is also best known for his semi-autobiographical works. He has actually started with saying, "If only they could talk" in 1970. Now, after that, there were a number of movies and television series based on his write-ups were made. So he has attained a popularity. Apart from that, he had been writing the semi-autobiographical works also. He has been very popular as a writer as and as a veterinary surgeon. This story, the present piece of story, The Triumph of Surgery. Surgery over here refers to a medicated place, or you can say a hospital for vets. So this story is about Tricky, a dog who is the pet of a rich lady named as Mrs. Pumphrey. She loves her dog very much, and hence it was unable for her to refuse him anything if Tricky wants. Tricky is fond of eating cream cakes and chocolates. So one day, when Mrs. Pumphrey is out with Tricky for a walk, the narrator sees them and stops to talk. Means Dr. Herriot stops there and asks her to talk for a moment. While talking to Mrs. Pumphrey, he realizes that she had been overfeeding Tricky and also had been giving him things that he must not eat, he shouldn't eat, and as a result, because of overeating, because of the overfeeding Tricky, Tricky had started looking like a bloated sausage, means a very thick, a very fat animal. Soon Tricky got unwell. It fell ill. The dog fell ill, and Mrs. Pumphrey finally called Dr. Herriot, Mr. Herriot, who is the narrator also here, in order to help. So she does not want to send him away, but the only way which Dr. Herriot suggested, that he must be hospitalized for 15 days. So in that way, the story unfolds into how he gets well, how he feels well, how the pet is recovered. So read the description to know more. And you must go through the chapter which has been given in your book, and then after that you will be able to understand the text in detail. Apart from that, I am also providing the summary of the lesson in the next slide. So what happens, how he is treated, what happens later on, let us come and understand. The story starts when Mrs. Pumphrey, who is a very rich lady, takes her dog out for a walk. Suddenly, she has been seen by a veterinary doctor who lived nearby and was knowing that lady. Suddenly that doctor, Mr. Herriot, the doctor is Mr. Herriot, the narrator himself, he saw the dog and was shocked as he saw that the dog looked like a bloated sausage. Dog looked like a very fat balloon which has leg at each end. He advises her to stop giving him unhealthy things to eat. But how could Mrs. Pumphrey refuse it? Mrs. Pumphrey was loving her dog so much that she was unable to refuse it to him. Soon he falls sick, and then the doctor is called. The narrator, who was Mr. Herriot over here, then somehow takes Tricky along with him. He asks Mrs. Pumphrey that please allow the dog to go to the hospital, otherwise he will not survive. Mrs. Pumphrey was unable to allow Tricky to go to the hospital, or unable to allow Mr. Herriot to take Tricky to hospital. But somehow Mr. Herriot was able to convince Mrs. Pumphrey, and he took that dog to the hospital. As Tricky was going to the hospital, Mrs. Pumphrey nearly fainted. Now, this man, Dr. Herriot, takes that dog along with him and puts a bed for him in his surgery, in his hospital. Now, the dog was not able to move much, nor he was eating anything for the first 2 days. On the second day, he looks around and whimpers a bit. Means he looks around and was taking a sigh of relief. He wanted to go out on the third day and even started playing with the bigger dogs when he was taken out of that room. Now he started licking the bowls of other dogs, which was let clean on the third day. Means he started having some food which was left by the other dogs on the third day. Then his condition started improving very fast. Means what doctor had done, he has given him on a very strict diet. In fact, he has given him for the first 2 days he has not given him anything to eat. He has just given him ample of water to drink. He started fighting for his meals with other dogs, and then with this news reached Mrs. Pumphrey that the dog has started eating now. She started sending eggs for the dog, as she thought that Tricky was recovering from an illness and hence it needed energy food. So what happened? As the eggs started to arrive, Mr. Herriot and his partners started enjoying their morning breakfast with those eggs. Then, in order to improve the blood of Tricky, Mrs. Pumphrey started sending bottles of wine also. Mr. Herriot took it as a privilege and drank that whole lot. He used to take 2 glasses before lunch and some more glasses while having his lunch. Means that wine was not going into the stomach of dogs. In fact, it was going into the stomach of Mr. Herriot. Now then, again, what she did, she started sending bottles of brandy for Tricky. And now Mr. Herriot was somewhere jealous, and he thought that he must keep Tricky as a permanent guest in the surgery so that he should also always enjoy such a meal. Mr. Herriot was feeling very happy when he was having 2 extra eggs every morning, then having few glasses of wine in the afternoon, and finally the day is closed by having brandy at night. But finally he took a wise decision and called up Mrs. Pumphrey, as she was really worried, and now Tricky was also well to be taken back home. Tricky was really very happy to see his mistress, and when it saw Mrs. Pumphrey, jumped into the car. Mrs. Pumphrey said that she was not in the condition even to thank Dr. Herriot for whatever he has done for saving the life of Tricky, and his surgery had been successful as because Tricky was now cured. So the doctor had taken the food of the dog and filled himself rather than feeding the dog, and in that way he has treated the dog and the dog got well. So that satisfies the topic also, that is the triumph of surgery. As Mrs. Pumphrey points out that this surgery has made a really successful work, as Tricky is now cured. So now students, you must read the textbook and then go through the exercises given in your textbook, as well as please pause the video and also take exercises from here, note questions from here, as these are really important questions for you all, and try to solve these questions. So that's the end of the class or lecture, and please subscribe the channel for further notification. If you have any problem, feel free to talk to me on my WhatsApp number, which has already been given to you. If you are having any problem, you can consult me over there. That's the end of the class. Thank you.